Hey guys, Jeremy here. This episode is going to be a little bit different than some of our previous episodes, where I mostly talk about either tomes or armies or like overall like gameplay state. Let me just move my chair around. How to. This channel is primarily about competitive play and mostly about the rules, about Age of Sigmar. But today's episode for me is going to be a little different, and it's mostly going to address um, the current state of the game in a very different way, not in a hobby way. Not it's still competitive, but I'm going to talk about something that I think I hold dear, that has been fundamentally changed since the new edition has started, and how I approach list design and I like to enjoy the game. And I think a lot of you, if you're listening to this channel, probably do the same or try or like the same things I like. So I'll start with this. I'll caveat that I do think the edition is in a good state, minus a couple changes. Rules wise, I still think obscuring needs to be tweaked. I'm recording this after the last August battle scroll, or the last September battle scroll, 2025. I do think the game state is in a good place. I don't necessarily dislike how the battle tomes are developing. I do, in the sense that we're now getting battle tomes where armies are fundamentally being rewritten from the index game. I don't necessarily agree. I don't necessarily dislike that. I guess Nighthawk might be the only one I feel like might have missed the boat, just because it's just a fundamental rewrite of how the army plays versus just the tome rule wise, or tweaks to the rule set or additional rules. But enough like gallivanting. I'll just get to the core topic. What's changed for me in this GHB or in this edition, and I think I finally pinpointed it recently, having thought about it for a while, which is jank armies don't fundamentally do well. And I'll define jank. Jank for me is something, basically, it's kind of like an off the cuff, not meta list or not net list, and it's not necessarily meant to be like functionally bad. It's just meant to be that like you're making suboptimal choices in your list design from the perspective of the broader community to achieve a certain targeted goal, be it as if like you're going to be thematically or playstyle lists. And I'll give you a perfect example of what I mean by jank list. For the last better part of, since the Gitmob book came out, the last one, I've been playing this kind of what I call a jank, like a Gitmob AOR army with just wolves and chariots. And just like the gimmick of the jank isn't so much in the units, it's the way it plays on the table. It has a lot of these like kind of like random, like these kind of luck based movement shenanigans that punish like your like armies that like want to charge you. It also has a lot of mobility. You can start off the table completely off the table. Doesn't even have to put units down on the table. They can all come from reserve. Like, so for the mechanically speaking, the army has this like theme, and the theme is basically to be this guerrilla warfare cav army. And the way it wins games is by basically move blocking, by taking advantage of bad decisions. Like, the thing about jank armies is, to win games of it, you fundamentally have to be lucky or just be drastically better at capitalizing your opponent's mistakes and overcome the mismatch of raw power through that decision. But every jank army you're going to design has effectively this core principle or theme that you're basically trying to abuse. I guess abuse is not the right term, but you're trying to use this mechanic that the army provides to overcome like the shortfalls of not being a raw power efficiency. So to preface, jank armies are armies where you're making elective decisions not to maximize its raw power for a gimmick that it has, and the gimmick can be powerful, but it's not necessarily face value powerful. It's not just raw efficiency in terms of army. And jank armies don't do well this edition. Like, they just don't do well. Not that they do well in period, but I mean, like, they just don't peer. Like, there's almost no room for them in this game state anymore. There used to be a room for Jank armies where you could take it to like a GT and do probably your best 4-1, and if you get lucky, maybe a 5-0. I mean, that's true for any army for the most part. But like, there was like, I have won GTS with Jank armies in the last since AOS came out. It's I can tell you, and maybe from my experience, it's almost impossible to win a GT in the current GHB with Jank armies. And the fundamental reason as to why is because the way the rules are written and the way the core of the game works, it's, we joke that it's not like tight, watertight or whatever, but the rule set is actually very, very good. And that's in terms of like design and power level, it's why Jank armies don't work, because there's less room to manipulate these, core gimmicks to a serious advantage over just raw efficiency at the table. And so that comes down to maybe why, the game is in a good state. We have a pretty wide range of armies in the meta, but in terms of list design and in terms of play style, I think the scope of the game has narrowed drastically. And by play style, I mean like the types of list archetype we're facing. I mean, the before this GHB, which I think has rectified some of the other issues, the previous GHB were mostly gravitating to very specific list archetype within each army. And this is the kind of the problem running into, I think, in this meta is that, or in the current edition, is that when a book comes out, there's going to be maybe one list archetype that dominates the performance of that battle tome, and you're going to see deviations, slight deviation, like stylistic choices or just like play style choices to deviate from that core list archetype to, offbeat, off changes like some elements of it. But for the most part, it's 80% the same or 60% the same. You don't see armies necessarily going be very different from each other. And what I mean is, like, if you look at, like, I'll pick KO. Like, if you pick KO today, and you compare, and before this battle scroll, and you look at all the KO lists that showed up to an event, for the most part, they're very similar looking in terms of approach to how they win the game. KO might be not a very good example because there's not that many war scroll in it. Let's pick another one. Let's do Stormcast. Stormcast has an incredible access to war scrolls, but there is only, every list is going to gravitate towards like a very small minutia of set options, which are the most efficient. And you could say that is an issue of the tome, but I think it's an issue of the overall direction of the game. I'll explain why I think Jank armies are fundamentally worse in this GHB outside of just raw efficiency, people gravitating towards raw efficiency. They're worse because of the way command points interact and disruption at the table. A lot of the Jank army designs are about disrupting your opponent's ability to do things at the table, or to potentially have a power advantage in these situations, but it's mostly around like taking advantage of movement, taking advantage of pylon, taking advantage of denying your opponent from doing things during their turn. But now we have all of these other command abilities that allow your opponent to also bring disruption to the table in a way that like the raw efficiency armies basically, the raw efficiency armies get. So in a sense, straight raw efficiency armies also get the benefit of some concept of jank built into the army. Countercharge, great. Counter prayer, counter spell, or counter casting, whatever you want to call it, great. Covering fire, great. Like all of these things are designed to disrupt your opponent's basically ability to dictate how his turn's going to resolve, or has to manage like those decision tree. But it also, as a side, byproduct, is able to punish the armies that want to play this kind of disruptive playstyle as well. I'll give you an example. If you had the ability to turn off this wizard's ability to get this spell off because it like is a fundamentally huge bonus of your opponent, like not through unbinding, not through an artifact, just because of like some janky mechanic that you have that like basically you would never take because it's, you know, it's jank, but you're doing it because there's this theme behind the army you're designing, and all of a sudden like your opponent says, cool, you know, you stopping me on my turn from doing it. On your turn, I'll spend a CP to basically tempt it again. And a lot of these jank mechanics don't work like as these like passive, conclusive, like continuous mechanics. They're usually only resolved in your turn. Like, or like I'll give you the Git mob example. Oh, you charged me. I was able to make my roll to move away from your charge, so you can't fight that unit. And then I'm gonna maneuver around the table. Oh, it's my turn now. You roll a counter charge. You make the charge. Okay, I can't use my mechanic to get away because it only works during your turn. And all of a sudden, like, all of these, like, janky mechanics start, like, falling apart because your opponent, which has more raw efficiency at the table, has access to also these kind of disruptive jank mechanics. Or gimmicks, I guess, like, in a nutshell. And that's why these types of archetypes are not performing as well. And I will also argue that's why that you don't see a lot of list diversity in types of armies, and I don't mean in like in terms of like, hey, I'm playing you know, Sky Warden spam KO, and I just chose to change this Sky Warden's Endringer. It's a completely different list. I mean, like, I'm saying like, hey, instead of playing a boat, you know, carrying Assault Frenzy army, what if like you want to play this type of like Arcanaut spam list, you know, and take advantage of this whole like mechanic that you have to basically ignore the first Pippa Ren if you don't move Arcanaut, like things like you're not going to see that on the table. I mean, maybe you will have to put Battle School, but I doubt it because by raw efficiency, everything else in the book is way more attractive than that. And in a lot of other armies, it's the same. Like it, you know, we gravitate towards these specific, like very efficient armies because jank types armies don't win. They don't interact in a unique way that these raw armies are interacting and are able to interact, right? The price for them is command abilities. So, like, in a sense, like, it's why, you know, I'm trying, you know, maybe I'm trying to get too meta and too abstract about why we don't see more list of the you know, diversity across armies. But my opinion is that, like, it's one of the reasons why, and it's also one of the reasons why we don't see these types of armies being taken to GTs, because they're not interested. Like, why would you want to take them to a competitive environment and know that you're probably going to go 0-5, 1-4? Like, it's not worth it's not worth it, right? The other problem with jank armies, they're completely at the mercy of mission designs, right? And in the way you score points. I think currently Git Mob as a concept is interesting and it's good and not punished too much by the battle tactic path. But, like, you know, the army wants to do, like, let's say I want to do scouting forces with it. I can reserve everything off the table. Can't do scouting because if you reserve, they're not scouting. Okay. I understand from balance reasons why you didn't want to do that. But it is, like, unfortunately, completely negating this type of, like, jank that this gimmick that this army can do in terms for that battle tactic. Okay, so let's look at other battle tactics. All of the board state ones require some kind of ability to dictate, taking a point from your opponent. And Git Mob can do that. They the charge, the +5 OC helps a lot, and they can probably do that, but it requires basically, throwing yourself in harm's way. And then if you don't kill anything, because that's what Git Mob unfortunately has sometimes the inability to do, is unable to kill things, just because by raw character profiles, well, then when you get charged or counter-charged by your opponent, none of your mechanics jank-wise work because you're already in combat. That just turns off the mechanic. So, like, I mean, yeah, this is where, like, you have to make playstyle choices. Like, you're basically playing the game on a hard mode, is what I'm saying. But it's not just about playing the game on hard mode. They don't, like, if Git Mob was the only army that could do this, this basically retreat mechanic, and there was no way for your opponent to charge you on your turn, you'd be a lot, more punishing as a gimmick than it is today. And of course, I think the rules designer don't want an army that basically says to your opponent, you don't get to play the game, ha 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 ha, because like I'm sitting in front of you and you can't do anything about it. I don't think they want to promote that. But I think they should at least consider that there should be some room for jank armies to exist in the meta and not be completely crushed by the raw efficiency armies. I don't know how they're going to balance that. I mean, this is obviously a very like hot take, and I'm probably going to get put on blast for it, or people are going to be like, well, think about all these extraneous reasons. I don't know. I'm just trying to capture like my state of mind regarding like I have this conflicting thought in my head that this edition is very good, but at the same time, I'm like, when I'm trying to brew, I'm kind of the guy that likes to brew lists out of like kind of like different than what the meta decides, and for other reasons because I find it interesting and it's what appeals to me and it keeps me motivated to play the game. I also like to play armies that function in the table and can actually potentially win in an event. Obviously I'm asking for too much, I think, maybe in that regard, but I have been able to do that for most of my life playing AOS or my AOS career. So what's different about this GHB or this edition? What makes it so hard for me to do these things consistently? Like, just because I won Everwinter of last GHB because I brought Fire Slayers and Gotrek does not make it for me. That's not a jank list. A jank list for me is like I said, the Get Mob AOR. Or it'd be like playing the Feck AOR with all the serfs. Like, yeah, I feel, and maybe this is the theme, is that a lot of the jank design is like kind of like stuck in the AOR concept, but you can play jank lists are not in the AOR concept. Like, there's a way for you to play Skaven, mostly a lot of Doom Wheels. Like, that's a jank archetype, and it was a jank archetype. There's also the list of like the Grimwrath list, the Deathmaster list. They're all janks. They're all janky archetypes. But like, are they? The Deathmaster one is taking advantage of like the hit mechanic debuff that they natively passively have. The problem of that mechanic as well is that raw efficiency armies just kind of like push through it. If they're you're basically dependent on playing against armies which are like low attacks of high quality, and then unfortunately like even efficiency wise, like most armies being taken do kind of high quality and also higher volume in some cases, so it kind of overcomes. Anyway, the problem is the jank archetype just doesn't really exist as a concept. Not in the sense that you can't bring a jank list and have a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun playing the Get Mob list. I think it's hilarious. But I know, like, from my heart of heart, like, I'm never going to win a GT with it. I'm not even going to have a winning record at a GT with it. And, maybe I may need to make peace of that part of myself to be okay with that. But I was just more like, thought process of like, what's different from this edition to this edition, or from the first inception of AOS to this edition, that makes like jank armies so fundamentally mechanically unable to perform anywhere near like a top performance. It's just because of the way the rules are written and the state of the game, and it's not I don't want to make it sound negative, because I do think like the rules are good. I just I want them to have a little bit of more liberty, freedom for jank armies to perform. Like, there's nothing stopping you from taking a jank list to an event. I just think it becomes fundamentally incredibly hard to do. And also, like, please don't confuse jank with spam. Like, just because you bring like nothing but gun haulers does not make you jank. You're trying to jank armies have to take to a specific gimmick. Like the Deathmaster one, you could argue is a gimmick. The Fireslayer one, the Grimwrath is probably closer to spam and less of a gimmick than is the Deathmaster one. And I do think the Deathmaster one is more of a gimmick. It's trying to take advantage of like this disruptive element. The Fireslayer one, or for example the Grimwrath, it's mostly about making your opponent have to split attacks. And that's disruptive because splitting attacks can come at a great cost because of probability and laws of averages and so forth and so forth. And then like you could whiff, and then all of a sudden, because you whiffed, this like really nasty guy might be able to punch back and do a lot more damage because you whiffed, right? Or you didn't kill him. Like, that's disruptive. This is like a more linear disruptive, and then there's the more complex disruptive, right? You also, like, they've fundamentally tried to remove a lot of that kind of gimmick out of the game. Like, we used to hate playing into Tzeentch because Tzeentch had all these gimmicks and these built-in things, and they still kind of do, but not really anymore because they toned it down so much that like now they have no real gimmick. And the armies that do have gimmick today are in terms of like the meta armies like Cities of Sigmar. Their gimmick are not like complex. They're definitely disruptive, but they're not complex, right? And I do think like after the cities change in the battle scroll, you'll probably see a little bit less of them. But like maybe it was the only army left that had a true jank in a sense, like was cities with the Scourges, Gyran, Pontifex. But like they've made it as part of a mission statement to reduce that level of disruption out of the game, but yet they made disruption available to everybody through covering fire, countercharge, redeploy, like all those core mechanics, right? And I think that's why, like, to reiterate for the millionth time in this video, that's why jank armies don't do well, because raw efficiency armies have access to jank. And that's why you don't see them anymore. And that's why you don't see this broad-ranging, like, diversity in terms of list design inside a battle tome. I do think it's funny that I'm sure somebody will point out to me, probably somebody like Tomo, will point out to me how there's actually a lot of diversity in army design, into list design into each faction. I just don't think that's the case. And maybe that's my opinion, but like I think like the variance of diversity across them is negligible. We're not talking about 60% of divergence across armies. We're talking about like 20 to 40. That's not that interesting. Like I'm talking about like completely redesigned, ground up, like completely different, something different. It doesn't exist, or at least in my opinion, it doesn't exist right now in the environment. Anyway, hope you appreciated this small, short, 20-minute video of me ranting about the state of jank and AOS, and to all my talking heads around me, just basically. Yeah, it's kind of weird watching myself through the ages. Through the last 3 years, I should say. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I'll hope to hear from you guys in the comment section about this.